economic advisor of Abraham Lincoln. And Carey was the major proponent of the American System Protective Tariff, the development projects that gave us the transcontinental rail system that allowed for the first time, a unified nation as a whole that could travel over inland development, in opposition to the British control of the seaways and all the think about the British. By being a maritime empire, their ability to have a stranglehold as a tiny little island over the entire world with a sun never set was by maintaining the biggest control of sea trade routes. So to the degree that you had maybe 18 different key choke points where all ships had to go through, by controlling simply those, not having to control everybody but those key points, you were able to generally control the global empire. Now, what does an empire whose monopoly depends upon that think about a nation who develops rail across the inland and can now communicate with each other in different parts of the world, different parts of the nation, without having to rely upon sea trades or people who otherwise control all the ships? So, yeah, he's an important fellow, and he's a guy I used specifically because as I was trying to find a theme for this class, I picked up a book we had in our library that I never looked at called The Unity of Law. And it was a book that he had published in 1872. And I opened it up and I found in the first preface an attack on Charles Darwin. Well, specifically he's attacking Malthus, but he's bringing up Darwin. And I thought that was interesting. All right, that's cool. So I read the book. Now, he begins. It's called The Unity of Law because I think it's an interesting way to juxtapose that with Darwin's unity of law. Right? You got both people trying to find a unifying principle, but using two totally separate methods, so it's very clinically interesting. Now, what he does is in the preface, he quotes from Charles Darwin's Descent of Man to draw a point on the same paradox we had seen at the beginning of our class. What makes human beings unnatural? Right. Charles Darwin.
Savages, the weak in body or mind, are soon eliminated, and those that survive commonly exhibit a vigorous state of health. We civilized men, on the other hand, do our utmost to check the process of elimination. We build asylums for the imbecile, the maimed, and the sick. We institute poor laws, and our medical men exert their utmost skill to save the life of every one to the last moment. There is reason to believe that vaccination has preserved thousands who from a weak constitution would formerly succumb to smallpox. Thus, the weak members of civilized societies propagate their kind. No one who has attended to the breeding of domestic animals will doubt that this must be highly injurious to the race of man. It is surprising how soon a want of care, or care wrongly directed, leads to the degeneration of a domestic race. But, excepting in the case of man himself, hardly anyone is so ignorant as to allow his worst animals to breed.
Must be something wrong with people. Yeah. So a lot of people today they say that Darwin was misinterpreted by the eugenicists, by his cousin and all these guys. No, they took him for his word. And I think I pulled out another quote from the same book just to drive the point. At some future period, not very distant as measured by centuries, the civilized races of man will almost certainly exterminate and replace the savage races throughout the world. Charles Darwin. So it's sort of like our destination, right? Eugenics.
The savage races mean
those who are
the not populations of the Aboriginals.
Yeah, I mean, anybody who's not civilized and fit to survive, right? The preservation of the favored races in the struggle for existence. Huh? Yeah.
Can you skip to the previous slide?
Yeah, sure. I can give you a copy of this thing if you want. Okay. Huh?
What do you mean by the savage? The Africans?
I think he would qualify in his mind. Yeah, tribal societies.
you give a reason why the civilized societies would necessarily exterminate the savages?
I think he just saw it as natural. He just thought it was a natural progression. He doesn't.
His book was titled, there was something about the fight among races.
Can I just say something?
Yeah.
Races had to.
Like, isn't civility having like compassion and mercy and things like that?
No, civilization is empire.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a paradox. They say that does the weak members of civilized societies propagate the kind of weak members should exist in a civilized society, or only a civilized society is able to take care of them.
Yeah.
How did you hear
And in the
that?
next passage that you showed is explaining the opposite thing. Like, at some future period not very distant as measured by centuries, the civilized races of man will almost certainly exterminate and replace the savage races throughout the world.
Yeah.
So it's not very clear about what is a civilized society, what is civilization,
not
who
very
is actually the savage.
No.
It's always us.
That's an understatement. Huh?
It's always us. We're civilized. They're not.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like he's saying, like that would come before the extinction of man. Or no, actually, yeah, that's kind of very contradictory because he's saying that actually the best will destroy itself. It's like in the Republic, you know, when, or you know, like the refutation of Nietzsche, like when in the Republic you have Sisyphus, which is saying that justice is the power of the stronger, the will of the stronger. And, you know, just like the paradox is, you know, why the weakest actually have more power on the stronger at the end. You know, in the democracy, you know, it's just the will of the society of tyrants will eventually fall anyway.
Oh, they're sort of
Yeah,
desperate
like,
claps because
changes
they
all the
suppress.
time.
Like you're suppressing the masses to such a point that you create like a
uprising.
boiling pot. Yeah, that creates an uprising. Takes care of it. Yeah, then you got Karl Marx's paradox, right? Yeah, perpetual,
Seeing, like,
cyclical.
The strength of the society is how it cares for like its lowest members or those deemed not weak. That's the strength of a society.
That's the strength of a society, right?
How it cares for the weak.
That's what Henry C. Carey's point is, right?
Not to
'Cause-
Darwin.
Not to Darwin, no. But to Henry C. Carey, that's right. To a human being, that's right. To an animal, that's not right. Okay. Yeah, because Carey is getting specifically what he's hitting at, sort of on a multi. He's hitting this at a few angles. Where on the one hand, he is attacking the economic policies of London, the imperial policies, by getting at certain assumptions of Malthus. And the one that he attacks the most is belief in the law of diminishing returns, which is taken from Adam Smith. And this belief has it that in anything you look at, be it a tool, be it a factory, or be it land, you always begin with the most richest state, and the more you use the land or the tool, the more it wears down and the value decreases. Such that if you want to extract continuously a profit from that, not only do you need to introduce more laborers to the land or more people, you know, using the tool, which is becoming increasingly less effective, but you need to, as a landowner or as an entrepreneur, so to speak, you have to keep on paying increasingly diminishing wages to the laborer, right? If you want to keep on maintaining that profit. Right?
There's less and less coming out of it. And at some point you have to go on and look for somewhere else to.
Yeah, then you got to get in a war with somebody else who's. You got to make your land bigger till you get in a war.
Ask you a question.
Yeah.
Like about that, you know, civilized. Okay, put in a sample between Canada.
Yeah.
Quebec and the English part. So we civilized.
I think until we actually get out of the colonial system of empire, until we get rid of the Queen, we're all in trouble, coast to coast. Yeah.
Not just the Queen, but the Parliament itself.
Oh yeah, the whole system. I mean, until we break,
Parliament
yeah.
is so undemocratic.
until we stop being a dominion and start being an actual nation, yeah, you're gonna get a certain bestialized culture.
Yeah, but I think in order to understand this, I think people should just keep in mind that we're dealing with time where it was more than obvious that you had a British Empire controlling the whole world.
That's true.
The relationship of the British is towards their colonies, right? That's when you have civilized and savage makes sense in that type of dynamic. It's the colonizing versus colonized people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That thing you said about Adam Smith, that sounds like a justification for slavery.
It is, and that's Carey's point that he makes in the book, is that the nature of that belief, that unexamined assumption, will continuously lead to absolute slavery. Right? Everyone's getting paid less and less, the land is becoming more and more worthless.
Eventually paid nothing.
Exactly. Yeah, right.
But I don't exactly see how that happens. 'Cause I mean, the way it's applied to contemporary economics is basically just it was describing something rather than saying this is like.
Well, think of the guy in China. Like the guy in China can't afford to live on 20 cents an hour, so we go to the next country that can do it for cheaper. We have the next country that can do it for cheaper.
The race to the bottom.
Yeah, the race to the
Who
bottom.
can we pay less and treat the worst to make the most money?
In theory,
At the same time, it's a justification for progress too. Like you can also your returns will diminish unless you get like cheaper labor, or unless you develop a cheaper way of making it, like leaving your labor the same.
Well, that's what Carey actually in the book, he argues that real progress has to be re-understood. He's attacking monetarism because he's getting at the first point in the human economy that when you're thinking of value, the worst metric to begin with is just money, plain and simple. And he says what we can know primarily is that we live in a physical world and that things change in one of three ways. We had this discussion at one point. Right? Things are going to be consumed and produced generally by a process of change in place and change in form. So everything that exists, that goes around in physical reality, is right. It changes you change it from place to place, and you change its form. So this was wood at some point, ground up into pulp, produced your table. So you change the form of something. And in regards to human economy, possession too. So you have change of possession, those three things. And with that as a basis, the point of his unity of law, the thing that he brings together, is this idea of the increased powers of association. He says, first of all, as you don't, as you successfully don't encounter that diminishing return paradox by cultivating the minds of your workforce, what we can observe is that the opposite is the case. That lands don't actually diminish in value as they're used, nor do tools do the same either, like your factories. He says, in observation of the physical reality of the human society's development up until that point, the opposite's been the case, and that the wooden hammer has become a stone hammer, became a copper to an iron hammer, and each time the effectiveness and durability of it increased in value, so it accomplished more work. Same thing for the land, and he pointed out that as you introduce new forms of farming, new discoveries of how to deal with your crops, machinery, you're actually having less people on the land produce more at a greater level of technology and knowledge, such that the quality of life of your population as a whole is increasing. And this, he says, is directly a product of the rate of increase of the powers of association. That's sort of his. For LaRouche, it's LaRouche's gem, I guess you could say. The point of what gives your society economic value is the increase of the productive powers of labor and relative population density. Whereas what Carey's getting at is essentially the same thing: is that as you're bringing together your consumers and producers, such that you're not just sticking on one thing, like you're not just doing a cash crop the way we do today to places like India, and they just do one thing as a nation.
The cash
that we
crop
say
is
that they're
inherently an imperial.
Yeah, sure.
Right?
Yeah, it says you're not allowed to be sovereign. It says you do this thing well,
Like
so we're going to ship.
In the southern states, they do tobacco. It's
Exactly. Identical, yeah. And you see the way we do things today, where products from China that are produced in sweat houses literally travel. They're made with lumber and raw materials coming from Canada. We ship them all the way halfway across the world, right? Convert them into something to be used by little children sweatshop laborers who don't have a very, very high quality of life and use little technology, and then we ship them all the way back for $1 stores.
So you can buy crappy furniture at IKEA or something?
Yeah. No, that's all Swedish made, actually. I'll stand by IKEA for now. But yeah, it's totally in opposition to the idea of an integrated sovereign economy where your agriculturalists don't just do that, but have access to cities that have industry, and you're increasing the division of labor. So the division of labor is actually increasing as you're giving people, as your society is progressing in new technologies, giving people, as you have a machinery that can alleviate the work of slaves. Now you have people who have talents that they can express that they wouldn't have known about if they were just using brute labor force, you know?
Those talents are used for
Can I just say one thing about Carey versus Adam Smith?
Yeah, sure.
Because I think if you look at the American system, that they did want free trade. Like, for instance, let's say America and Canada had both been sovereign republics back in Abraham Lincoln's time, and both of the goods coming from Canada or the United States were produced by workers and not slaves, and et cetera, et cetera. Both of them had reasonable standards of living, and they were produced fairly. That the United States would not have imposed high tariffs on Canadian goods. That Adam Smith's argument for free trade inherently allowed the British imperial system to continue based on cheap goods made by slaves. And the American system was arguing that that is not a free market, where if you allow the existence of the imperial system, that is not a free market at all. And so to counter that, you need to destroy the imperial system because it's not a free market system. And so the way to do that is through high protective tariffs, to banish the imperial goods from your market. But if, let's say, you could have an ideal world where everybody's a republic and all the workers are treated fairly, then the tariffs would not be needed.
Yeah, that's why the fact that the different individual states within the colonies had free trade amongst themselves functioned because they had a unified. It worked in that context where they had a unified constitution, which ensured a strong federal government, but certain principles that had to be maintained, like the general welfare. Whereas the fight at that time, before you had the constitution, was that every state was like an each against all thing. Whereas like Virginia, they wanted just their slaves, they wanted their protective tariffs on certain things, and they had different economic policies, which made a divided house.
I mean, the South.
Which again, that was what Lincoln was up against too, right? That's what Henry Carey was was fighting to maintain. Whereas during the Civil War, you had the British financing and sponsoring the Confederate South it wasn't just to watch some entertainment, it was to dismantle and divide and conquer your arch nemesis, to break it.
The North.
The whole nation. The idea of
a republic.
Yeah.
I remember somebody saying the people who had the free trade systems,
Yeah.
if you went to their territories, it was like backwards. They had no railroads, no running water, no electricity.
Yeah.
Right, that's the imperial model. The imperial model doesn't want to develop the territory. Right. Only give the example of the southern colonies in the States. They would want to develop them. Let's say that one was particularly good for growing cotton. They would want to develop them insofar as growing cotton was concerned. So if you need roads to deliver the cotton from the farm to the sea to put on the ships, then they'll build those roads. And if you need some houses to house your slaves, they'll build those houses. But that was it. The only development of the land was for whatever needs you needed to do what you wanted to do on that territory. There was no concept of like a transcontinental railroad to promote the general welfare. That's an inherently Republican ideal versus the imperial model.
But why? Why is it?
Because that's the whole idea of empire, is that you exploit a certain area for its resources and deliver nothing back to the people who live there.
The opposition.
All of the wealth goes back to to the mother, in this case Britain, but before it was Venice, or there was the French Empire too.
Yeah. That's the idea of the difference between exploitation of land and the development of the land. Where today, when you say the words development, the trigger that people have in their mind is imperial exploitation, you know? Like, oh, Africa doesn't need any more development. Haven't we developed Africa enough? Look at them. You know? As the general control of sea trade routes. So to the degree that you had maybe, 18 different key choke points where all ships had to go through, by controlling simply those, not having to control everybody, but those key points, you're able to generally control the global empire. Now, what does an empire whose monopoly depends upon that think about a nation who develops rail across the inland and can now communicate with each other in different parts of the world, different parts of the nation, without having to rely upon sea trades or people who otherwise control all the ships? So, yeah, he's an important fellow.
And the sick. We institute poor laws, and our medical men exert their utmost skill to save the life of everyone to the last moment. There is reason to believe that vaccination has preserved thousands who from a weak constitution would formerly succumb to smallpox. Thus, the weak members of civilized societies propagate their kind. No one who has attended to the breeding of domestic animals will doubt that this must be highly injurious to the race of man. It is surprising how soon a want of care, or care wrongly directed, leads to the degeneration of a domestic race. But, excepting in the case of man himself, hardly anyone is so ignorant as to allow his worst animals to breed.
It's very clinically interesting. Now, what he does is in the preface, he quotes from Charles Darwin's Descent of Man to draw a point on the same paradox we had seen at the beginning of our class. What makes human beings unnatural? Right. Charles Darwin.
Savages, the weak in body or mind, are soon eliminated, and those that survive commonly exhibit a vigorous state of health. We civilized men, on the other hand, do our utmost to check the process of elimination. We build asylums for the imbecile, the man...
Economic advisor of Abraham Lincoln. And Carey was the major proponent of the American System Protective Tariff, the development projects that gave us the transcontinental rail system that allowed for the first time, a unified nation as a whole that could travel over inland development, in opposition to the British control of the seaways and all the think about the British. By being a maritime empire, their ability to have a stranglehold as a tiny little island over the entire world where the sun never set was by maintaining the biggest. He's a guy I used specifically because as I was trying to find a theme for this class, I picked up a book we had in our library that I never looked at called The Unity of Law. And it was a book that he had published in 1872. And I opened it up and I found in the first preface, an attack on Charles Darwin. Well, specifically he's attacking Malthus, but he's bringing up Darwin. And I thought that was interesting. All right, that's cool. So I read the book. Now, he begins... It's called The Unity of Law because I think it's an interesting way to juxtapose that with Darwin's Unity of Law. Right? You got both people trying to find a unifying principle, but using two totally separate methods. So